Have you ever walked alone near a cemetery when it was raining? At first it was normal, until suddenly you heard a faint crying sound. The sound was soft, sobbing, but it became clearer. Who would cry in a place like this? Many people say that this is not an ordinary human voice. This is the voice of someone, or something, still trapped between our world and theirs. This legend comes from Indonesia in a small village that has an old cemetery on the edge of the forest. Local residents believe that there is one grave that should not be visited when it is raining. Why? Because that is where the crying sound comes from. This grave belongs to a young woman named Sari. Years ago, she was known as a kind and loving girl, but her fate was tragic. One night, her fiancé never returned after promising to marry her. Sari waited, and waited, until death took her in sadness. Since then, every time it rains, people often hear the sound of crying from her grave. Some have tried to find the source, but strangely, every time they get closer, the sound just disappears. This myth becomes even more terrifying when some people try to prove its existence. A young man once camped near the grave, hoping to record the sound of crying that he said could only be heard when it rained. That night, it rained, and sure enough, the sound of crying began to be heard. He turned on the flashlight, trying to find out. But what he saw was something that made him run away in fear. A woman's figure stood among the gravestones, her long hair covering her face, her clothes soaked, but the scariest thing was, she wasn't standing on the ground. Is this really Sari's spirit? Or is it just an illusion created by fear? There is also a story from an online motorcycle taxi driver who once passed the grave during heavy rain. In the middle of a quiet road, he saw someone standing on the side of the road, wearing a white kebaya. Thinking it was a passenger, he stopped. But when the woman turned her head, her face was blank, pale, and her eyes were just two black holes. Until now, this legend is still a mystery. Some people believe this is just a story to scare children. But there are also those who believe Sari's spirit is still wandering, crying in sadness, waiting for something that will never return. So, if you ever pass an old cemetery during the rain, and suddenly hear crying, what will you do? If you like horror stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss other scary stories.